Hi everyone, welcome. Today we're talking to Allison Chow about her show, which is currently at Slice, and I've forgotten the name for.
Oh geez, me too. It's called Poetry and Illustrated Ponderings.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about poetry and illustrated ponderings. Just to get started, how are you?
I'm tired.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's summer's been amazing for Vancouver Mural Fest, and there's so many opportunities. So my goal next year is to learn to say no to something.
Got it.
But good. Tired
Yeah,
but good.
good. Well, I'm glad you said yes to this. Thank you for not
Yeah.
saying no.
Yeah.
Thank you for not starting your no
Yeah,
saying a little bit earlier.
That's next year.
Yeah.
How about you? How are you
I'm
doing?
good. I'm great. I'm also tired, but I'm excited for this.
Yeah, me too.
I was wondering if we could start by asking how you would describe your art and the show as a whole.
I think my show and just my work in general, I was just talking about it with my friend Sabrina, and it's made in the darkness of my basement.
Cool.
It's 2 a.m. work that a lot of times, there's parts of us that aren't expressed in our daily lives and our daily routines. So I find at 2 a.m. there's a lot of images that kind of come to mind, or there's things I want to explore. Like there's a feeling of heaviness or joy, or there's some like personal like struggle I'm trying to expand to not contain but to experience. So I think I would describe my work as very dreamy in the way that on the wall of portraits there's two and a poem, My Mother's Daughter, came out of that. But how I write too, it's like the image of a woman in a dream and then a tiger, and then as I'm working on that, that helps me slow down and spend time with those thoughts, and then those thoughts kind of take on like a poetic body, and then I run out of words, and then I go back to expressing that visually, and then the visuality helps me complete the written work.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So do you go into these pieces with kind of an idea of what you're expecting or what you're looking for to get out of it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's really just a flowing with the process and hopping back and forth.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like I would say like My Mother's Daughter also, like half of it came through one night when I was talking to my friend Carolina, and we were just talking about her background being from El Salvador, and what is this relations that we have between us third culture kids, like people that like we relate to each other in very specific ways than maybe folks from our home countries, or just this aspect of us. And from that, and after a few drinks, like that first half like came pouring out of me, and so it's like, I don't know, sometimes it comes fully formed, and sometimes it's just kind of goo. It's like that silly putty that's trickling through your fingers.
Yeah. Since you're talking about My Mother's Daughter, do you want to maybe describe what that is?
Yeah. That's a good question. This is great. This is great reflection time for me.
Good, okay.
What is it? I would say it's a collection of images that go with a poetic prose called My Mother's Daughter. And I would say the content of that is kind of exploring, being a child, being an immigrant, and just seeing your parents kind of seem to, when you're small, your parents are like gods.
Sure, yeah.
They're moving mountains, they're moving the heavens and the oceans to kind of create this life out of nothing. And I was just like, whoa, these people are so hardcore. But when I start to reflect on how I fit into that, I was like, I'm not hardcore. I just have many questions and many feelings.
Was that your feeling as a kid, or is that you're reflecting on your feelings as a child? Or do you still feel that you're not hardcore?
I still feel like I'm not hardcore. Yeah. I realized that a lot of what works for my parents just doesn't work for me. I'm like, I'm not for long-standing suffering. And I think, actually, My Mother's Daughter came out of when I left my job initially to pursue art full-time. I was actually terribly burnt out. So I thought it would be the renaissance of my spirit, and I'm gonna like flourish, and I'm gonna have all this like creative juices and I'm gonna like make my like art. And then what came out instead was like a lot of sadness. Like I think just a lot of kind of sadness that I didn't allow myself to feel. So kind of flowing with that feeling and be like, well, like, you know, it's like this little thread. It's like, what else are you sad about? Like, where else did you feel this? So it didn't necessarily come from thinking about my childhood, but then kind of like just unpacking, like, why do I feel the need to be so hardcore? Or it's like, how did I get to this place of burnout that I forgot my body and kind of I neglect things like eating properly and like eating well and nourishing myself and like how did I get here? And I think working with my counselor, like we talked a lot about like why is my idea of hard work always tied to like suffering and sacrifice?
Yeah.
So my mother's daughter is really about unlocking like the beauty that comes from like small t traumas and but then also acknowledging that moving forward with certain ideas might not be helpful to me anymore, but then maybe in the past it was helpful. And to kind of like honor both those things because it wouldn't be right just to say that's like, oh, all that experience like didn't like it's just part of who I am and to cut ourselves off from any part of you like isn't great.
Yeah, of course. Talking more about how you like associate hard work with suffering. I'm curious about like what the healthier version of that concept looks like to you now.
Well, it's still a work in progress. I think especially like in the pursuit of art, I really struggle with this sometimes. Like to really be so nourished by opportunities like this right now to that we get to create spaces where art and stories are so important, and then also towing the line of like security of like financial security like food security and it's just like right like how do you not have both but how do you honor both these like needs. I think I don't have an answer, but some of the things I'm exploring is like what if things like love and belonging are just as important as like food and like housing security and like what does it mean to be like a dignified human being and not just live in survival because I think that's what I was doing before where like I had these like end goals that like I push so hard but I'm like right but there's this all this other part of you has now gone into like this kind of frozen stasis and like we are not doing well now.
Right, I see. So what I hear is you're talking more about finding a balance between nurturing all the different aspects of your life rather than putting everything into one spot and then letting that consume everything and then ticking up the other pieces when they start to fall apart too much.
No.
Okay.
Like I want that to be my truth. But I would say I think it's just within my character to work on things obsessively.
Okay.
Like I'm having that concentration to be with a work and to get into the flow of it, that will always be significant in my kind of practice. But I read a work by Pema Chodron called like When Things Fall Apart and talking about how what if that was just a natural cycle that it's like you know if we move through the world and we didn't see our failures as such like maybe heartbreak and all these things that help expand us it means I get to paint my whole life with the whole palette like of like reds, yellows and like blues if they represent all our different life experiences and that like that it's okay like if you build a construct around your life like these are the things I think I need to do and then those are all just prototypes that you can be like okay you can course correct and be like am I feeling nourished in these ways like is it like what is my family and friends circle looking like what are the conversations I'm having like am I being uplifted and just trusting that inner voice that's growing I guess maybe somebody said something recently that was like confidence is is a thing that happens after you do the things. So it's
Yeah,
like
interesting. Okay,
being
yeah.
able to more so reflect on the experiences. Like I don't think I'm any better at stopping the car crashes like
Okay.
we're talking about, where it's just like right, like now I'm at a state that I can make some observations that I need to learn to say no to some stuff because I need time in between the murals and the shows and like the projects to kind of like unwind.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that made sense.
It does, yeah.
Okay, good,
yeah.
good.
And I'm curious about the acceptance of who you are and the way that you operate versus like this maybe idealized image of who you feel like you should be.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that?
I don't know. I think I'm trying to reach a point of like radical acceptance for myself at every stage. It's, I think, one of my things I try to focus on is that emotions are things to move like through, like with conversations like this, like with conversation with friends and with art making, that it's like all of it's beautiful and all of it's important and you're just moving through it. So there is no, I'm trying to get further away from like the ideal me, but like there's still that ideal me, which is just mainly exactly this. Like I'm having conversations, I'm making art, and I'm not worried about like financial security. Like that's the only like extra sprinkle that I think the ideal me that I'm envisioning right now. But it's coming from that place. Like I had a conversation with my parents recently about this journey, and I was talking to them about like I think asking for what I need is kind of something I'm trying to move towards, and like not being ashamed and not being guarded, because I think sometimes when we tell our friends like, you know, you're not there for me, like it's, we're creating a lot of shame within somebody else, and like it's hard because it's more vulnerable to say like I really wish you were there because I felt really alone and by myself.
Instead of taking like an attacking of like you're not there for me, saying I wish you were there for me, like opening yourself up.
To say like the story underneath, like a lot of times, like I think that's what I noticed within myself, where it's just like it's hard to make yourself vulnerable like that. So I think a big step forward recently was having that conversation with my parents, that I'm like, I know you don't understand what my art is about, but I would really like for you to come to my art stuff like once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think I had this old story that it's like my parents don't get it, like they're really focused on like practicality and like that, like I think sometimes they show up in art spaces and you know it's not their scene, so they feel like a little bit like awkward, a little uncomfortable. And I realized that like I have this like resentment building up where I'm like, why don't they come to my things? Like I
or
support,
why don't they show up in the way that you want them
that
to?
I would really like for them to. So we had this like wonderful conversation where my mom just said like yeah, like we don't know what this stuff is, but like, and then she said something that really made me laugh, which was like, she's like, I don't know if you'll be like, I don't think you'll be like other people's daughters. And
what do you think she meant by that?
She was saying how your path is different than my path, and it was hard for me at first to wonder if I've led you astray or I didn't guide you in a way that was helpful to you, because I think in our relationship there's a lot of like what's going to put food on the table, you know, what is going to be secure, and that is the best advice to give you a good life. And I think it was also her own reflection to be like, but this daughter of mine. So I think that's the kind of response to my mother's daughter, is just my daughter, I guess.
Yeah.
In the way of her looking at my work and understanding the person that I am, and which is separate and different from her worldviews. And so she said that, you know, I know when people ask me, I tell them that my daughter is making her art and she's very happy, and and my daughter is not like other people's daughters, and
Sure.
and for that I think it's a courageous path, and like I don't know where it will lead, but like it's a blessing that that we're able to witness like this kind of
Yeah.
like somebody charting out their own path. And yeah, I think recently that was something that really helped me to see this part of my process where it's like, right, like we all each have maybe one, we know one for sure, one beautiful and true life to make something beautiful in this world. And we all have an internal compass that tells us what brings us joy, what is our truth, and what's right for us in this moment. And following it is always a courageous thing to do. Yeah. I don't know. As promised, I'd ramble.
No, we love a ramble. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Staying on my mother's daughter, there's also themes of kind of finding a sense of belonging and this kind of limbo between two cultures. I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Absolutely. Like, okay, the first example that's coming to mind right now. So I grew up going to a kind of private school, a Catholic private school in an Italian district.
Okay.
So when I first came to Canada, I didn't register that I was the only, like, I was different,
Right.
and like that. I was like, I thought everyone in Canada has like a Nona and loves soccer. So like that was just my context, you know? And I came to that school in grade 2, and then everyone was asking me like, what's my Chinese name? What's my Chinese name? And I was explaining to them like, that's not how it works. Like, you just get a Chinese name. Like, it's not a like, there's no translation.
Yeah.
Even though, like, now there might be, because, like, I suppose if your name is, like, Starfish, then there's a translation in Chinese.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense, yeah.
But anyway, after I was trying to explain this,
Yeah.
and, like, my classmates just wouldn't give in. And I was just like, okay, you know what? I tried my best, but okay, your name is dog poo. Like, so I'd say that in Chinese, and I'd be like, okay, your name, and I was in grade 2, so like my bad words were like yogurt container. Like, it wasn't.
And I'm assuming no one else could understand you.
Yeah, it wasn't spicy.
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes it feels a lot like that, where it's like, you're like, haha, this is hilarious. And like, look at them, like Royce going around telling people his name is dog poo.
Right.
But then you're like, after a while, you're like, oh, like there's this loneliness that sets in. Because you're like, there's no one else to laugh about this with me.
So like one other person who could understand you.
Just
like,
one other person that has that context.
Yeah.
But it's also... I think so there's a lot of like silly, joyful moments like that, or that it's like your parents don't understand like what you're reading, so they don't know that you're reading like smutty like fairy books, like because like I think growing up they were a little strict, but I think there's like a lot of gaps, like lost in translation. So there was a lot of gaps between that, and I think each family too, like I would say the culture we have at home isn't necessarily a strict transplant from Hong Kong, you know? Like every home has their own culture, but then I think when you are also an immigrant, then that culture becomes like microscopically only your family. Like you might have inside jokes that are like part Cantonese and like part kind of the context like of something that's in English.
Yeah.
So it gets pretty funny. I think there's a lot of like when I was younger, a lot of like code switching, you know, when I was really surprised. I think and I told Sabrina this, but like when I was in high school, there was a moment where I think someone was explaining something to me about like they're like, you are so whitewashed, like as like a really like flattering thing, and I'm like, oh girl, like we have so much internalized racism, and it's like it's those moments where people don't read you as certain things, which is totally fine, but I would say that is like part of that cultural experience.
Yeah.
And I think where I'm trying to find consolidation is in my art, like where, like we're talking about before, where because of how you show up in certain places and spaces, like people are registering and reading you in a certain type of way. And I feel like it's like that part of your personality has now developed a whole cast and crew. Like there's like, it's an episodic, like, like there's a whole universe around that character already. But like there's all these other parts of you that are still important and held, but maybe less conventionally appealing.
Yeah. I like the analogy of like the cast and crew supporting like different characters in different spaces of yourself. You said that when you were younger you did a lot of code switching. I'm wondering how you are now, if feeling that cast and crew follow you around. Are you more accepting of the fact that you are going to change in different places, maybe very drastically, or do you try to maintain kind of a consistent person in all the different spaces?
I think there's no trying to do it. I would like to be, but I feel like these days I'm just like total unhinged. This is the correct word, I feel.
Okay, sure.
Where I was just like, what am I doing? Like in these like workspaces, like who am I being professional for? It's like this doesn't make me happy. Like, and it's like who am I trying to prove? Like by behaving like this, like what am I trying to get out of this? Like if I'm not being accepted for like my ideas, like what abstraction of this like corporate ladder am I like trying to climb? I'm like I don't like this is dumb. So I think there are still triggers for me, where I think there are just spaces that like become unsafe and I just want to leave as fast as possible. So I have seen myself like switch in some of that kind of behavior.
Where you kind of like close yourself off, like for a feeling of safety.
Yeah, be like I'm out. I'm this is I'm out.
This is not it.
And I don't know how to talk about this without stepping on any toes, but I guess I was working, I would say, on a project that I felt like I was maybe a diversity hire, or I was being curated in a way to represent something, and I was being shoehorned in a way that I didn't feel reflected my work.
Right.
So I think
they were trying to make you a certain something to fit their goals versus
that's
just
right.
hiring you for who you were and having you on the team for who you were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think stepping back, like I think it's like, I'm also a flawed, imperfect human being. Like I have so many things that like I'm going through and experiencing, and I understand that maybe for this team, this was one of their goals, and because of their background, this is how they perceive the situation. So, like, in my best self, if I was to perceive and just be like, right, this isn't a match, and talking to my counselor really helped. That's just like, right, like, if people aren't meeting you in the middle and you're trying to express yourself, that's like, this is taking on racial tones that is not reflective of the work, and I don't want it presented this way, and kind of experiencing kind of like, I would say, like, not, gaslighting's too strong, like that's not the right word, but like you're being shuffled into a thing and you're like, oh, okay. So I think those are the only situations I feel myself like switching still, where I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna like just say whatever and just like leave the situation, just make a note to like never work with you ever again.
Right, yeah.
Because like we're just not, it's not healthy for me. But
I think that's a strong realization to come to for sure.
Those are, I think, otherwise, like, I'm just saying, unfiltered stream of consciousness in every other aspect of my life.
Great, love that.
Unhinged.
In your intro to your show, you talk about poetry, and I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of poetry to you.
Yeah. Honestly, I think poetry is, I consider it a technology in my life. Like
technology, interesting, okay.
Especially when we're talking about like these different experiences and aspects, and like how do you consolidate them? Because a lot of times it's like, it's hard to hold that, right? That's like, this person made me feel really bad. And what if I could step back and they're not necessarily like a bad person or somebody who's dangerous to me, but they're just somebody that's having their own life experience and doing the best that they can. But then, okay, after I have that, like, realization, then, like, I can't go savage and just, like, rip them a new one.
Yeah.
So where does that put me?
That you have this feeling to process and it's not appropriate for you to do it in the real world.
Yes. Like, if I stop following that thought pattern. So I feel like poetry is a place that holds all these things closely but loosely. Like, it's like this feeling of being rejected, like this feeling of being hurt and this feeling of being attacked, all very real. But also this desire to connect with others, this desire to be seen. Like, how do you hold all of these? Like, they're all important, because I think a lot of times we live in such like a fast-paced world that it's like we work on this assembly line where it's just like, I just need to reject the bad feeling, and then like if I label somebody as like, this is a bad and negative experience, then that's how I can like move through my day and survive. But poetry, I think, is the antithesis of that. And that's why for me, I think poetry is part of the antidote to, and just art making. I think it helps us to see each other, but most importantly ourselves, in these really beautifully gentle ways and tender ways that can lead to, I think, like the antidote to violence sometimes, like against ourselves and against others. But I think that's a long journey.
That's definitely more of a stretch, but I definitely see what you're saying of having a healthy way, a space that is your own to process these emotions in a container that is either your poetry or your art, or even like a sharing space to express what you truly feel authentically and unapologetically, just to get it out as it is, versus bottling that and then unleashing it on another person.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, like, I would extend the idea of violence to the same as like demeaning, like the little ways that we demean people or that we oppress like certain groups, and like the systems that we create around like these. For me, I would classify those as like minor, not even minor, like I think going back to the idea of if love and belonging are just as important as like shelter and food and like these like primary needs, then for me that is a type of like violence that can be negated by like interperson connections.
I'm curious though about when do you feel like, if you're processing through poetry or through your art making, but there's also something that needs to be done in person. I'm curious about like, do you ever use maybe art as like a crutch where you try to put it there so that you don't have to do it in person, and what that is like for you?
I would say that's why, like, in my mind, my most important work starts with poetry. That's where I'm feeling it's like your tuning fork, like before you play like a piano. It's like if something's out of tune, then whatever you do following is built on a faulty foundation. So I feel poetry is about aligning to find my true north. And in my previous work, and sometimes some of the work I do now too, is kind of in the social design space, and it is in kind of the community engagement space. So my work starts with poetry, but I also have like the workshop at Slice of Life that I offer, but also like installations. And yeah, I think all my work is always very hands-on. And it's like, I want to make sure that my center is true and what I'm bringing to people is true and authentic, that like it can help others like share their maybe less dominant stories or like stories of like vulnerability and like things like that. So I never perceive art as a crutch because I do something about it eventually.
Okay, yeah. It's more of like a starting point.
Yeah, because I think sometimes it's like, I don't know, like maybe during last year's like heat wave when your computer's so hot and like none of your programs are working because it's just like fritzed.
Yeah.
So I feel like art is just like that restart, like that reboot, like get everything aligned because you have added new software to you. You've downloaded new experiences, new ideologies, and like maybe like new wisdoms from the world around you. So it's like, how can you recalibrate?
Yeah, cool. Talking about how you use poetry as the starting point to go back and forth between your two mediums, there is the Disappearing Vest. And so that is a story, a poetic story, and also a collage. And I was wondering if you could walk us through the experience of going back and forth between the two and the themes that are represented in the collage that also show up in the story.
Yeah. So I think this was a story that came, like, I have a membership at the Access Gallery in Chinatown. And they had a collage night. So my life has really been about collage for the last 2 years, which is reflected in the show.
Yeah.
So that, again, just came up through conversations about, like, what's going on in our lives. And at the time, getting to move my body, I realized my hands were telling me that my dad had this really intense experience where he fell from a roof and like broke like 9 of his ribs. And it was also, wait a minute, that's ICU. Never mind.
Yeah. But they are connected.
Yeah. So after that experience, that's where I started collaging the pieces from ICU. And as I was writing that, I felt another poem in me pulling out.
The Disappearing Vest came from processing ICU.
Because I think like as my father was dealing with his like broken ribs and they were still like going to Hawaii, like I don't know, just like very stressful dad stuff. And again, I think part of that came up for me was like when I still remember when the ambulance was taking him from his fall, he was just saying like, I can't breathe, but he was saying it in like Cantonese, and I don't think any of the paramedics could understand him. So, you know, I was telling them that, and they're like, "Yo, you can't come in the ambulance with us." So I think a lot of times, like, that's also part of my cultural experience of just, like, translation language barrier stuff. And I think that's why I'm so attracted to, like, a visual medium sometimes. But, yeah, after I made that work, my dad was also starting to have, like, memory loss. Like, I would just find him, like, on the ground, and, like, it's funny now, because it's, like, a year ago, and since then, like, we were able to work with a doctor to determine that, like, it was potentially, like, seizures. So he's been taking a seizure medication, and, like, that's kind of slowed the process. Stabilized the process, yeah, for him, for sure. Like, before, it was really scary, where he would only have these episodes, like, once a month, where he would just have this, like, whole few hours, where he'd be like, did I talk to anybody? I was like, yeah. And I just have, like, a notepad, and just be like, well, you called the bank, and then you told, like, your friend that you're going to play pickleball with them. And he'd be like, okay. So I think there was kind of, it's a really scary situation, but it's also, I'm the only child, and I'm the first daughter, which is, again, included in the only child. But in our culture, you know, there's it's a great honor to be able to care for your elders and take care of your parents. So I'm like, right, like this is the time my blood debt activates.
You step up, you take your honor position.
Yeah, and we go from maybe a parent and child relationship to like we like, you know, like exploring caregiver roles within myself and how to support like my mom through this experience as well. So that's definitely where the disappearing vest came from. The vest in the title, I was just thinking back to like when we first moved to Canada, my dad, he'd always take me on adventures. Nice. Like we'd go to like Lynn Canyon and just like be like, I think my mom was working, but like I'd pack like my old brick gray Game Boy and like snacks. I'd have
to
a
Lynn
backpack.
Canyon? Game Boy is portable. Sorry, I thought you meant GameCube.
No, like I just like, and I just remember this way that he was expanding my world through these like small interactions, small and big interactions in the world. And in all the pictures, like he'd always be wearing this like, I guess it's like a fishing vest. It's got like mesh in the back. It's like canvas. It's got like pockets, and like every camping trip I ever remembered, like he was always wearing like this vest because it has like, it's a very dad vest. It's got like pockets.
I can imagine that.
Every father has this vest. And like one day when I came home, I think when he was experiencing these kind of like medical memory lapse, he was packing away a lot of his stuff, and he was just like, you know what, like I don't want you guys to have so much stuff to deal with, which is like such a beautiful, caring gesture.
Yeah.
So I remember one day when I came home, I found this vest in the donation bin, like kind of right at the top, and for me, that it was like a moment for me. And that's how I know a poem's coming, where I'm like, oh, shoot, like that.
Should I have something to process?
Yeah, be like, oh, like it's in the chest, like. And I was just like, you know what, and my dad, he's still taking me on a lot of adventures, but maybe within our relationship, and like, how do we care for each other, that he's a dad for the first time in his life too, like he's being an older person for the first time in his life, and like we're both doing this for the first time and trying to do our best. And for me, a big part of that was like, he is letting go of these aspects of himself. And it's not my place to like change any of that, like to honor what he needs to do to kind of like process what his life looks like if I can't remember chunks of my day, if my body, my health situation is changing, like, and it just kind of brought me back to like him helping me with my first steps, like into the world, and how can I be there for him too as he's stepping into this next phase of life. Whew. And it didn't make it in the show this time, but I'm actually making a collaboration with Moniker Press in Chinatown. So my dad actually had some reflections and some like life advice that he came up with after he read The Disappearing Vest and like saw the imagery. So that will be coming. I'm not like, I'm plugging myself, but like there will be a piece that's coming out where it'll be in his words in Cantonese, and there will be a picture of him and mom like in his vest.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And where will we be able to see that?
Don't know yet.
Okay. So stay tuned.
Yes.
Okay.
Probably on my Instagram. I will probably. I am kind of bad at it, but I'll probably tell people about it.
It'll end up there eventually.
Yeah. At some point.
You had mentioned that he was letting parts of himself go. I was wondering if you felt there were any parts of yourself that you had to let go to step into your new role as well.
Yeah, I think a big part of Disappearing Vest was that journey of being like, oh, how can I show up for him? Like, he's already scared. Like, I want to be the rock for him that he was for me when I was just, like, trying to walk and, like, be in the world as I am. And I remember, like, in grade 7, my teacher had a conversation with my mom where she's saying, like, Allison has a lot of potential, but she doesn't do any of her homework, so she's not going to have a very good future. And what my teacher, and you know what, I still play with this idea where I'm like, I'm learning in school, why do I gotta do more schoolwork at home?
Yeah.
Like, I should just go home.
Yeah.
But I also didn't connect, like, I should write things down in my agenda because I won't remember them by the time I get home to, like, do my homework. And anyway, my mom, she was very concerned, and she was just like, you need to have a future in this world. And she was very intense about it. Hence, my mother's daughter, it has a component of, like, what does it look like to have this mom that just moves mountains with, like, her sheer will. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, I just forgot to, like, write stuff down.
I just forgot to move this mountain.
Yeah, I just forgot to move this mountain. Or, like, do we have to? Like, why? Like, the mountain's fine. But my dad, because I was crying, I was very upset. Like, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have no future. And, like, if my mom is telling me this, then I'm very afraid as well. Because my mom is afraid for me. So, and my dad was like, you know, like, I don't care if you are, like, become anything in your life. Like, all I ever care about is that. All I ever care about is that.
I think we do have tissues if you need them as well.
Yeah. No, my mascara. Yeah. But, he was like, all I care about is that you have you're a good person and you just do the best you can. So I feel that's a lot of my stance with my dad now, where I'm like, like, you know, how can I help you be the best you can be? And celebrate that, like, that, yes, there's physical and mental decline, but I see you're trying every day, and that you're doing your very best, and I'm proud of you. And it's like, how can we live that together for each other? Yeah. I think that's been a big part of, that transition, like, that we're in right now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe we could just end off here with you maybe talking about your talking to stranger circles and explaining that if people may want to come to that, or telling us what that's about.
Yeah. So, okay. People may know that from this conversation, I'm someone with a lot of feelings and a lot of experiences. So my art practice has been so healing for me. And what I do here at Slice of Life every month, the first Tuesday of every month, is try to co-create that space with others that are interested in that. So, talking to strangers, there's 2 ways I think of strangers. There's this poem by Khalid Gibran called Half Lovers, and there's a chunk of it that says, and I might be, like, butchering this, I probably am, but this is what I took away from it. It's, the one you love is not, your other half is not the one you love. It is you in another time, but the same space. It is you when you are not. So it talks about sometimes when we abandon ourselves, or, like, what makes yourself known to you may make yourself a stranger to those around you. And I think we were talking about earlier how sometimes we hear about how cold Vancouver is and how lonely, and so, I mean, that means strangers are in high supply. Yeah. And I think another interpretation I have is that sometimes the closest things to us are the hardest to see.
Ooh, okay.
So even if that's in our familiar relationships
Yeah.
or friendships or just the dynamics that we have, there's a lot of patterns that we're echoing, or that's what I found like in my life. That's like, oh, I keep on having to be this version of myself, but then like I didn't realize I pushed myself so far out of like what nourishes me that I'm now in this like weird like state of I need a reboot.
Yeah.
Um, and I also felt this sometimes when I'd be talking to somebody in like a Safeway or like on the bus or the train. And
Yeah.
I think people are telling me like the most like horrific stuff in their lives. Like where they're just telling me like these like really, really like painful things, and I'm just like, oh man, like I still think about them like every once in a while. I'm like, God, I hope they're okay.
Yeah.
And from that came a desire. It's like I hope that more of us can have the vocabulary to like reach out and ask for help in a safe way, to kind of like not a safe way,
but in a safe way.
But maybe in a safe way. I mean,
Sure,
like people like
if that's where the opportunity arises.
I'm like, I'm holding celery and you're telling me about like your life. I'm like, okay, like this is it, I guess. Yeah. This is the moment. But I'm just like how can, like, because we do have that vocabulary, we have such a heart to connect and like be seen. So it's like we have the words, but maybe sometimes we just need practice, like saying them, and then maybe we also need practice a state of grace that we can witness each other in our imperfection and witness and not feel like, whoa, like this is like way too much and it's none of my business, because I feel when we're in a community, we do have a responsibility to each other, but maybe not in the way that people consider draining or like you know, overbearing. But it's like I think when we're healthy and like interwoven, we're stronger that way, and we might not always agree, but I think we can all be together to honor the inherent dignity of the human spirit and like what people are experiencing. So talking to strangers is a space for that. Like, I don't know, okay, maybe I've upsold it too much now. Like, basically, it's
I definitely want to go.
It's a place where I process my emotions, and everyone is welcome to come to it with me, where I always invite people to just like take what works for them and like leave what doesn't, because you know, I'm just a person, I'm just an artist, and I'm sharing what works for me. And it's a space that's meant for people to be able to move their bodies. We use our voices, we use our hands, we use our eyes, we use our visuality, and like we use our stories to better understand ourselves and the world around us. And the project that's coming out of that is the communal kind of like affirmation deck. So in the show, you also see like 18 cards that it's like through conversations, people have kind of like either they take one of the conversation cards and they're using that time to continue meditating through that through art making. Or like, you know, sometimes we hear a word or a piece of conversation that kind of like triggers something. Because like maybe you have a disappearing vest inside of you that you've been holding on for some time, and it needs a space to come out. And I think part of making that safer space for me is autonomy, that no one feels like they're sharing more than they feel comfortable or safe. So I think it's also a place to experiment. Like in the cards that I have in the show, I should have grabbed one, but here it is. Excellent. I have like questions that honestly just were aha moments for me. Either in kind of like therapy or like when I was just like lying on my like kitchen floor. I'm like
the best therapy.
It's the best therapy, and a lot of it's somatic for me. So that's like in the practice as well. So like I think sometimes therapy can be expensive and inaccessible. And this isn't meant to be a replacement. But I was just like, you know what? Like these are like the first 10 sessions of my therapy that were very helpful. So if they can help anybody else kind of experience a little bit more lightness, I think that'd be wonderful. So I think that's the first half, and then I have a bottom half that's like a deepener. So it's like sometimes I think people run out of things to say. I mean, I don't, because I have so many words and 2 languages.
Right.
Yeah. But I think sometimes, somebody shares something vulnerable with us, and maybe sometimes there feels like we're stepping into something that feels like new territory or a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
So the bottom half is like, well, if you want to like go for it today, like maybe try the deepener. And within the deepener, I have a lot of like open ones too. So I hope that like maybe this can be like training wheels for us to develop the language to deepen like in our own life. Like it's like this kind of works for me, and like I encourage people that's like it's totally fair. Like if some of these cards, like just honor yourself. That if this doesn't feel good to ask or right to ask, reinterpret it. Like it's a very active like practice of like communal care. Like read the vibes like in the room. Like what is good and caring in this environment that we've created here. So yeah, that's what we do.
Cool. That sounds awesome.
And the last part, right? The deck that we're working towards. That's in the show. So I'll be running these until December. So we're about like at a halfway point right now.
Okay.
So based on every session, on the back is a piece of advice or words of encouragement or kindness that individual has found during that session and would like to share with somebody in this community. And they're mostly made by people that like live right in like the Commercial Drive area. So a lot of it is specifically meditating on like this neighborhood specifically. And I find like that's probably maybe one of the most important parts of the workshop, that people walk away feeling like, or not feeling like I think people walking away with an understanding of how much knowledge they have and how much they have to share and give. And like I think a lot of times in the world we live in, we're constantly feeling like we don't have enough and we're not enough. So I don't know. I really hope that by doing this, we can affirm for each other that it's like you do know like so much. You have so much to give, not only to others, but especially like to yourself. Yeah. So that deck will be finished up in December, and something else will happen with it, I guess.
Will it be available somewhere?
I don't. No, because I didn't get consent from anybody to distribute.
Okay, cool.
But then I was thinking maybe another collaging event like this show, but then maybe people can like trade in their collage for one of the cards or something like that. But like, I'll think about that in November.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we finish up?
No, I just really appreciate this time to like think through a lot of your thoughtful questions, and I really hope that people will enjoy the show.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed
thank you
talking
very
to you
much,
today.
Jaden.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Do you have the slap?
I do. Would you want to clap it?
Allison can do it.
Oh!
You get to finish things.
Do I just do this?
Whenever you're ready to end it.
Excellent.